US President-elect Joe Biden is widely expected to improve relations with South Africa and the African continent. The South African government is also hoping for a strong partnership between the US and Africa in promoting international peace and stability. For more on the bilateral relations between the USA and the continent, I'm joined now by former ambassador to the USA, that's Ebrahim Rasool. Mr. Rasool, thank you very much for your time. The likely attitude of the US towards South Africa in the Biden administration, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Xoli. I want to say that it can only be better, although I don't think that it would be an immediate high priority for a Biden administration dealing with the fallout of 4 Trump years. I think that certainly Africa and South Africa may have an interest in negotiating with the Biden administration for an extension of the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which is due to end in 2025, in order for Africa simply to recover from an economic setback, from the COVID-19 impact. I think we have a better chance in doing that. The alternative under Trump would be that he would push for free trade agreements, have the capacity to flood African markets and South African markets with things that we may have an abundance of and destroy some local industries. And he would also, as we have seen with Kenya and other countries, make extraneous conditionalities, such as if you want a free trade agreement with us, you will have to recognize the state of Israel. And I think that we need a set of rules that are predictable again, that is reasonable, and that we can all prosper together. I think that certainly the AGOA is one of those matters. The other matter that I think that we could expect better results from is to end the trade war with China. I think that Africa and South Africa gets goods onto the US market in 2 ways. One through the African Growth and Opportunities Act, the other one by sending raw materials to China, which then find their way as manufactured goods to the US. And under a trade war, that gets constrained.
You speak about the hope that AGOA may be extended, but at the same time, you also caution that the immediate priority for Joe Biden may not necessarily be the continent of Africa, given the challenges in the US. What gives us hope then that the Biden administration is possibly going to be the good glimmer of hope that everybody is hoping for?
I think that we have to leverage a number of soft power issues that I think we have. The fact that a Kamala Harris, that the Congressional Black Caucus is very strong in the Biden administration, that the kind of African-American vote was fairly decisive. I think that those are historical leverages that South Africa have used, and certainly in my time at the embassy had found as a major source of support for Africa's claims. And there is that understanding that unlike the Trump transactional diplomacy, there is the understanding that peace at home for Americans depends on well-being in places like Africa, the Middle East, and therefore getting back to investing. So I think it's going to take an enormous amount of advocacy work with our natural allies in the US. And already we can see very good people beginning to fill those kind of spaces, such as, for example, the US ambassador to New York may be more attuned to the security priorities of Africa, which indirectly means a push for economic well-being on a continent like Africa.
Yeah, bilateral relations between South Africa and the US, how would you characterize those during the era of the Trump administration?
I think I would regard it as fairly non-existent, except for those things that were running already. I think it took a while for President Trump to even place an ambassador in South Africa. I think that showed the state of the relationship. I think that it's probably going to be that Biden would want his own ambassador. Hopefully that will not take too long. But I do think that it gives us the opportunity to identify South Africa's priorities, to identify Africa's priorities, and to get coherence amongst Africa again, so that we speak not as individuals that Trump can make individual transactional deals with, like with Kenya, like with Sudan, and put extraneous conditionalities, but Africa should be able to speak with one voice again. I would expect that Biden would pick up where Obama left off with a US-Africa Leaders Summit, in which Africa speaks together about its collective continental priorities as we go forward.
You speak about continental priorities, and the president of South Africa is currently the chair of the African Union, and what springs to mind is the African Continental Free Trade Area. Possible enhancements to this, of course, working with the US administration?
I think that that is the greatest leverage that South Africa and Africa has over the US. I think that the idea that Africa is not a series of 54 national markets, but one massive continental market with at least 400 million middle class that can buy things from the US and that can manufacture things for the US. I think that that is a single trade regime across the African continent. I think that that is the most alluring prospect that we have to sell to the US and to sell to the Biden administration. So I would certainly urge, while the president of South Africa is still the chair of the African Union, I would urge that we now get behind those priorities, get the advocacy strategy going, send out the envoys, make sure that every embassy is attuned to selling that as the major reason why Biden should move Africa and South Africa up in the pecking order of priorities that he may want to face as we move forward.
Yeah, perhaps as a last point, and this one, it really quite interests me. South Africa has started talking about the possible lifting of sanctions against our northern neighbor, Zimbabwe. Your view about Joe Biden possibly buying into this? Could he be that president that helps to lift those sanctions, even with the kinds of human rights abuses? And let's be clear about it. There are continuing human rights abuses in Zimbabwe.
I think that it's going to be a very difficult one for the Biden administration, because Obama had invested a lot in those kind of sanctions, taken a highly moral position. But compare that, for example, with the ease with which Trump lifted the sanctions on Sudan, even though it's a very tenuous piece with lots of conflict still going on. I think that you've got to juxtapose not just one country, but you've got to juxtapose a number of factors in Africa to get to a consistent middle ground position. At what point are sanctions punitive, and at what point are the lifting of sanctions an incentive for a country like Zimbabwe to speed up the reform? At what point does Africa take responsibility for sorting out the human rights abuses in Zimbabwe in order for those sanctions to be lifted and the African free trade really take root? I think that those are variables that we need to, but a Biden administration will probably make Zimbabwe a kind of rallying call for their human rights agenda. And that may be a difficult thing, just from what I remember from the USA.
Interesting point indeed. Ebrahim Rasool, the former ambassador, South Africa's ambassador to the United States. Thank you very much for your time and your inputs on this subject. Well,